The easiest person to control is the person who feels guilty for disappointing others, because guilt shuts down clear thinking. And once you realize how much control hides behind guilt, you start questioning how many of your choices were ever really yours. You think guilt means you're doing something wrong, but sometimes guilt is just what you feel when you stop abandoning yourself. And most people never question guilt, because the moment you feel bad, you immediately assume you're wrong. But emotions are not always true, because guilt doesn't only appear when you hurt someone. Guilt also appears when you disappoint people, when you choose yourself, when you say no, when you stop tolerating absolute bullshit, setting boundaries, and stop being the version of you that people benefited from. That's why guilt is dangerous, because people confuse that emotional discomfort with morality. Just because something feels uncomfortable doesn't mean it's wrong. A lot of people were conditioned to feel guilty anytime that they created tension. For example, if they stopped being people pleasing, they felt guilty. That's how you become emotionally obedient, and instead of asking, what do I actually want, you say, how do I avoid guilt? That's why people stay in relationships when they already know it's destroying them. That's why they over-explain themselves to the people who already decided to not understand them. Not because they're weak, but because guilt became stronger than truth. And they're living according to what creates least guilt. And the moment someone can make you feel guilty for choosing yourself, they no longer need to control you directly, because your guilt will do it for them. The moment guilt enters your mind, your focus changes, and you stop asking what's true, and you start asking yourself what stops feeling bad. That's what people don't understand about guilt. Guilt isn't just a fucking emotion. It changes the way you think. When people feel guilty, they stop observing clearly, they stop questioning, they stop trusting themselves, and they become emotionally reactive instead of thinking clearly. Your brain hates emotional discomfort, so the moment guilt appears, it wants relief immediately. And that's not good, because the people who are desperately wanting relief are easier to influence. For example, you walk into a conversation knowing exactly why you're upset, and somehow you leave apologizing. That's what guilt does. Not because you suddenly became irrational, but because guilt clouded your thinking. Some people don't solve problems, they create guilt, because that is easier than taking accountability. That's why some people, the moment they feel that they're losing control over you, they create emotional pressure. And that's not always consciously. I don't say they're evil bitch, but it comes from insecurity, fear of losing access to you, fear of abandonment. But the effect is still the same. Control. Notice what happens when you try to say no, leave, or change, because suddenly the conversation stops being about your needs and it becomes about how your decisions would make them feel. They say, oh, you've changed, you're hurting me, because they don't directly say, I'm scared of losing what you give me. If you look at those statements carefully, it doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even address your actual reason, because they attack your emotions instead. And most people don't really give a fuck whether you're happy or not. They care about whether you stay emotionally available or not. People don't lose themselves all at once. They lose themselves one guilty decision at a time. Betraying yourself rarely feels dramatic. It looks small. Staying in a relationship where the person is fucking hurting you, ignoring your emotions. And over time, those small betrayal becomes your identity, part of who you think you are. And the dangerous part isn't what people do to you, it's what guilt convinces you to do to yourself. So people already know what's hurting them, but they just feel too damn guilty to walk away from it. Some people call it loyalty. Oh, they love me, but most of the time that's not the real reason. It's fear of disappointing people, fear of rejection, fear of not being able to be independent, fear of being the selfish, the bitch one. And actually fear of not being able to be independent, fear of that uncertainty when you created that change. That's why people stay attached to things that drains them, because they confuse self-sacrifice with love. But constantly abandoning yourself, it's not love, it's survival. Every time you betray yourself to keep someone comfortable, you weaken your identity and you make yourself think that that person has control over you, but they're actually not. Your job is not to keep everyone around you. Your job is to stop abandoning yourself. The biggest shift happens when you stop automatically trusting guilt, because not every feelings deserves you acting on it. So instead of looking for solution to stop that feeling, literally ask yourself, did I do something wrong, or am I just uncomfortable disappointing someone? Because most of the time, people can feel whatever the fuck they wanted to. People can feel disappointed without you betraying them. People can feel hurt without you doing anything. People can react emotionally without you being responsible for fixing it. And the uncomfortable truth here is that setting boundaries will feel selfish to people who benefited from your lack of them. This is your life. You have to relearn everything that you got convinced that you deserve, because at the end of the day, you were the one that was hurting. Face what you have to face, because if you don't do it right now, later you're going to still do it, because the more you stay, the more it's gonna cost you. So you have to learn to sit with it long enough until your thinking becomes clear. A lot of guilt disappears the moment you stop believing that other people's emotions are your responsibility. The scary part isn't that realizing how people control others through guilt. It's that realizing how many of your decisions were made just to avoid disappointing people, your relationships, your silence, even the version of you that you became. And once you see that clearly, you cannot unsee it anymore, because the moment you stop obeying guilt, you start meeting the person you would have been without it.